Hello and welcome. Today is Monday, May 11th, and it would be an A day. Last week we were talking about plot patterns, and in that discussion, I had mentioned that this repetitive plot pattern was really kind of an archetype. And in that video, I had said that I would talk about archetypes next week. Well, next week is here, so it's time for me to talk about them. Archetypes as a concept was really invented by a Swiss psychiatrist by the name of Carl Jung, and that's Jung. Carl Jung had thought that there was this collective unconsciousness, that people, through this collective unconsciousness, had this understanding and knowledge of this pattern of behaviors, of situations that was universally understood and would sometimes find themselves falling into those patterns. Now, we're not going to worry about the psychoanalytical aspect of that, and I stress that for any of my students personally, try to research that because it just leads you down weird rabbit holes. We're going to look at archetypes in literature. And there is some commonality in there. Whereas Carl Jung was talking about this collective unconsciousness of patterns, in literature, it's a different type of collective pattern. In that for archetypes in literature, we see a pattern of repeated types and behaviors and story styles that because they are repeated so frequently, they have become archetypes. They have become pretty universally understood and known. So much so that when people start reading a story or hearing the story, they kind of have pretty set expectations of what follows. They know these patterns well, and it's, pretty universal. And when I say universal, I mean cross-cultural. In other words, the idea of a hero is pretty universal for the archetype. There are some differences culturally, but some of the basic origins of the archetype are universal. So, in Western culture, a lot of our understanding of the hero is based off Greek mythology. But if you go to Eastern cultures, that can be very different, right? But their concepts of heroes have very similar structures. So the archetype for a hero typically is someone who has some sort of unusual or mysterious origin. So either their birth is shrouded in mystery or through unnatural origins, right? And what I mean by that is, either there's divine intervention in that birth or they were born through some magical process that isn't what normal people are born through. And they also typically have some sort of magic abilities or powers, right? And that can be in the form of strength or speed, intelligence, or so forth. And then, of course, the final piece there that's very important is that they do things to help others, right? And obviously, the hero piece, that's very important. And again, it doesn't matter what culture you're looking at, they all have this archetype in it. And these archetypes are pretty common. And for Americans, we tend to think of heroes in terms of superheroes, and Superman being probably the most world-known American created superhero. But there's a couple others, particularly in Asian cultures, that follow this pretty well. And you'd be surprised at the influences they've had. And one that originates in China is the story of the Monkey King, right? And the Monkey King is a story that, if it sounds unusual to you, let me just describe it and see if you can make the connection. So, basic story here is there's an individual who's born with a lot of powers. He has a tail. He's kind of mischievous, but overall, he's a good person and wants to help out. He has a staff that can extend, and he flies around on a magic cloud. Now, if that sounds a little familiar to you, that's the original basis for Dragon Ball. Goku is a retelling of the Monkey King story, which comes out of China, right? So this archetype of a hero that Goku fits into goes through, and it's part of Chinese story and folklore. So again, like I said, it doesn't matter what culture you're coming from, these archetypes follow through, and they have these patterns. Another common archetypal character is that of the mentor, typically in the form of the wise old sage. Now, this one is probably one of the easiest ones to spot, particularly in popular culture and media, where you see characters like Yoda or Dumbledore or Gandalf, right? This elderly character who always provides sage advice and is really knowledgeable due to their many years of life, right? So that old sage, the mentor character, is a pretty common archetype that you see frequently in literature and in most media nowadays. The Earth Mother archetype, right? This feminine character that is connected to the earth and is caring and motherly and gives advice is another one, right? So in, say, The Wizard of Oz, Glinda the Good Witch would be like the Earth Mother type. In Lord of the Rings, it's Gladiel, I believe, Gladiel, right? The elven goddess there. So that Earth Mother is another typical archetypal character. The outcast, the character who's been shunned from society and pushed out. That's a pretty common archetype you see a lot in literature. Now, sometimes there's some deviations here in terms of how you define the outcast. You'll see some things that say the outcast has to be a character that has been pushed out of society as a sacrifice to benefit everyone else. And you'll see some that just say that character has been pushed out. So like Gollum in Lord of the Rings, right? He has been pushed out of society. He's been pushed away and lives away from everyone else. But others, they view it as a sacrifice, a noble sacrifice to help others. There are other types of characters. The rebel, the character who always has to challenge laws and push back against it, right? Those are common character types, archetypes that you see frequently. And again, like I said, you'll see them, doesn't matter what culture you're in, you'll see those things in literature repeatedly. Now, situations in terms of archetypes, kind of talked about it a little bit before with the plots patterns, but the initiation is a very common archetypal situation wherein characters have to do something to be initiated to be able to pass through somewhere. The idea of the quest as an archetype, was a plot pattern too, is a very common one where the characters have to go on a quest to achieve something. The passing of a threshold is a very big one. It's a big piece of something known as the hero cycle, which again is a topic for another video and I'll talk about in depth later. But these are all archetypal situations. Now, as I said before, I'm trying to keep this relatively short. The key point to take away here, archetypes are these repeated patterns that are repeated so frequently that they become pretty well-known, established, easily understood patterns, right? Whether they be for characters or situations. They go across cultures, right? And they're universally understood. These happen so frequently over centuries in literature, through storytelling and so forth, that people know them without having to be explicitly told them. They understand and they can relate to these archetypal patterns, right? There's this connection that is made through them. And that's essentially a very brief, and I know it might not feel brief to you, but a relatively brief overview of what archetypes are. Now, if you have specific questions about archetypes, I can turn you to various places, or you can ask me and I'll do my best to respond to those. And if you have any other questions in general about either literature or school subjects in general, please feel free to ask and I will do my best to answer. This video is a little late because I had to keep redoing it because we had some tech issues and some other weird things. The cats are all soundly asleep except for, I don't even know what Loco's doing right now, but we'll keep him to the side. So hope everyone's doing well. And until next time, be good.